Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, the neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. Big Al and Mom Salsa didn't pay it forward to Karen. Before we get into today's episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss a video. So let's get started. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. This is a story I've been sitting on for a few years now, and having discovered r/ProRevenge a couple months ago, I decided it's finally time to let the world know what happened to a sociopath who dared to cross the neighborhood. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city, let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and two busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home, and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and, let's call her AM, was the priestess. In our neighborhood she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them, and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house, enter the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the 1st of every month, no partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the 1st of the month or an eviction notice on the 2nd. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon and he tried to claim we did it, yeah, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjoland. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short one month and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjoland to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call-out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter, we didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days, but it was evident he really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now one street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot, and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior, otherwise she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there, and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look the house over, and anytime a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by time he did get the news he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately. A cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes. Big Al and Mom Salsa. In college, I lived in a house with 7 other guys. We were student athletes and we arrived several weeks prior to the start of classes to begin training for the season. Because I arrived a day later than the others, my choice of rooms was one of the 2 basement units. This was fine because my basement roomie and I had a full kitchen and a large living room where we set up our big stereo and gaming system. That living room was great because my bedroom was a bit on the small side and it was nice to have a larger common area to hang out in. It was also nice because roomie often preferred hanging out upstairs with the other guys, leaving extra lounging space. While all of us were friends and teammates, most of the other roommates were from the same town and had known each other longer. A week later, without consulting me, they decided that we could have another roommate from that town and that said roommate could take the basement living room as his bedroom. I didn't dispute it because Big Al was a nice guy, and he was going to be a walk-on, non-scholarship player on our team who would contribute to the team in a surprising way. Most of us had been recruited in high school and were on scholarship. I moved my stereo and speakers into my already cramped bedroom, added a small TV and a Nintendo 64 to the setup. My younger brother, Rocky, and my good friend, Crow, lived in the dorms. We were all teammates. Rocky, Crow and I were from the same area and we grew up playing together. We spent our minimal free time between practices in my small room. We enjoyed listening to music and playing Halo and GoldenEye 007 while snacking and drinking whatever was available. After a very short time, Big Al made it very clear that 1. He was a huge D-baggin' too. He had no business being on a rec team, much less the college team. His hygiene was terrible, his social skills were lacking, and he was constantly interrupting any and everyone past the point of annoyance. He was overweight, unfit and unskilled on the field. He didn't make it past day 1 of tryouts and quickly became bored and useless at the house. He would take my and roomie's food from the fridge and leave messes for us to clean. We trained hard, twice per day during preseason, then once per afternoon when classes started. We really appreciated our downtime by napping or playing video games. Big Al would come in regularly, always without knocking. "Hey guys. What are you doing?" We considered it a stupid question every time because it was obvious what we were doing. We were doing the same thing every time he came in. After the semester began, we got into the groove of classes, practices and matches, sometimes traveling regionally. A couple of months into the semester, Rocky and I had the opportunity to drive home for a short weekend to see our parents. We also used this time to do our laundry and to indulge in my mom's famous cooking. My mom and dad are immigrants from Mexico, early 70s, American citizens, early 90s, and wonderful parents. They are our biggest fans and would drive the 1.5 hours to catch all our home games. Because we had come home for the weekend, we ate great food and got laundry done. Before heading back, Mom packed us a cooler full of homemade food to keep her poor boys nourished while at school. On this occasion, she included a big, cube-shaped jar of salsa. My mom's cooking was well known with my family and friends because it was delicious and because she had no set recipes. Her main dishes were consistent as she had made them countless times. She also took pride in her salsa because no two ever turned out the same. Whatever basic salsa ingredients were available, those were what she would use. Sometimes those tomatoes, sometimes more garlic and less onion, sometimes raw, sometimes pre-boiled. Always delicious. This specific jar of salsa was something else. She used more tomatillos and extra jalapenos. It was a bright green color. I remember that glass jar emitting a radioactive glow. I remember sampling it before leaving. It was a sweating, snotting, crying kind of spicy, and it was so good. So good. We carefully loaded our cooler and cushioned, protected it our fresh laundry. Our only stop on the drive back was a gas station that sold 30 packs of cheap beer for $9.99. I grabbed 2. We arrived back at school that Sunday evening and I carefully placed our food in the fridge, the salsa on the middle shelf. The beer went in my closet. We fell into our groove again. After practice one afternoon, Rocky, Crow and I were playing games and listening to music. Because we provided the chips and salsa, Crow mixed us a batch of purple Kool-Aid. This cube-shaped glass jar had a wide opening and a plastic screw-on lid. The sequence was to touch the corner of your chip to the salsa, throw it down, take a big drink of Kool-Aid and wait for the burn to calm before repeating. The salsa was so good that none of us could stop eating it despite it being so spicy. Before too long, Big Al comes in. "Hey guys. What are you doing?" No one answered. "What are you eating?" "Salsa," I said. No one made any eye contact. "Can I try some?" Again, no one answered, and Big Al took that as an invitation to find the biggest, scoopiest chip. He slowly proceeded to take a healthy scoop of salsa. One of his fingers touched the salsa. That's the kind of guy he was. No one said anything. No one made eye contact, and the three of us faced forward looking at nothing on the TV. He popped it into his mouth. He chewed once with a loud crunch. He chewed twice, crunch. We finally turned and looked at Big Al. His eyes had gone wide, pupils dilated, and his mouth had opened in a big, silent O shape. We stared. He appeared to be choking. No one said anything. We were filled with wonder and amazement. After what seemed like a long pause, Big Al finally made a sound. It was a combination of a goose honking and a car backfiring. Once, twice, and then several more times as he ran from the room. We broke down, belly clenching, rolling on the floor, pee my pants laughing till we couldn't laugh anymore. Then we kept laughing. We never found out if he puked or if he doused himself in milk or if he tried something else. We didn't see Big Al for maybe a week after that. It was in passing and he didn't say anything. He stopped poking his head into my room. He mostly kept to himself in his. And at end of the semester in December, he packed his things and disappeared without saying goodbye. More than 20 years later, we still get together Crow on occasion and we recount the story of Big Al and my mom Salsa. Added note, my mom passed away 3 months ago. I miss her terribly. TLDR. Bad roommate takes Salsa, gets burned. Edit. Thank you for the award. Didn't, pay it forward, to Karen. So this morning I had to take my puppy to the vet, nothing serious, just time for his next booster shot. On the way to his vet appointment, I decided to stop for coffee. I'm not a huge Starbucks fan, but the drive-thru is nice with my puppy in the car, so I decided to go there. The line was super long and out the entrance a bit. Your typical Karen driving a Ford Explorer packed with kids pulls up behind me and immediately lays on the horn. There's nowhere for me to go because the line is just crazy long, so I don't move. Karen then decides that every time the guy in front of me rolls even an inch, she's going to immediately lay on the horn. This goes on for the entire line, all the way up to the window. I finally get to the window and go to pay, but the girl excitedly tells me that the guy in front of me paid for my coffee. In fact, they have a streak now of the past 8 people paying for the person behind them. Would I like to pay for the person behind me? I took my coffee and told the girl, "That's really nice of them, but I'm not paying for the lady behind me. She's been a dick this whole line." And then I drove away. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and we'll see you in the next video.